Okay, we're gonna start with kids. Last week we did kind of a prerequisite thing, just talking about what we're looking for when we're raising our kids, and obviously, just like anything else, you kind of need to be goal oriented. It's a good thing to know where you're going. Otherwise, you kind of don't get there. He who aims at nothing hits it every time. is the issue. And I think a lot of times that's what happens with, or can happen with raising kids. Get up here, hurry it up, run, come on. One of the things you want to raise your kids to be is prompt.
Unless they have a crisis.
You don't get to have a crisis.
I didn't have one. Somebody else had one.
Right. She's a principal dealing with junior high kids.
For
and
heaven's sakes.
Junior high kids don't get to stop church.
True. That's why I'm here.
Okay.
Look what time it is. It's not even 7. I gave you a whole half hour to worship. I'm over here. Let me see what time it is. Right this minute. Let me see. I'm way ahead. How come they only did 3 songs? What happened?
Just be
7 o'clock is church.
Church
I'm
starts
10 minutes early.
Church starts at 6:30, chick.
I know.
Yes,
yeah,
it
I
is.
know, right? Watch and learn.
We're having a thing. She's also my employee, which is very special. Okay, we're in Ephesians chapter 6. So anyway, last week we talked about some of the issues with parenting and stuff, where you want to go with kids. Obviously, you want your kids to be godly. You want them to love the Lord. You want them to be able to do the things that God wants them to do, like love other people and not be selfish and be a good citizen and all that kind of stuff. And I think keeping, last week's study is just important for everything that we do as parents, to make sure that we're going in the right direction. One of the things I'm going to emphasize as we're going through talking about kids is being long-term in your thinking. You have to be long-term in your thinking. There's never been a time that I wanted to discipline my kids. All the time, and I discipline them a lot, and not one time did I ever want to. Was I ever looking at it and just going, okay, this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to this, or something like that. I always want to have fun with my kids. I always want them to like me on every kind of level and that kind of stuff. And if you have that mindset when you're raising your kid, you're most likely going to raise a monster. And I'm not just being facetious about it. You're going to raise somebody who's going to get disciplined by somebody besides you. And that's the problem with that. And so even though I don't like disciplining my kids, even though I just don't want to deal with it and that kind of thing, I always had long-term in mind, because what I'm trying to do is get this kid someplace. And what I want him to be when he's 18 years old is out on his own and able to function, and people like him, and he can keep a job, and he can be a good husband, and he can be a good father, and all of that stuff. And with my daughter, obviously, the female portion of that whole thing, she needs to be a good mom and, again, a good employee, because she's going to work at some point, and all of those things. And if I don't get them there by the time that they're 18, I failed in my parenting. And so I have to be goal-oriented in that, and I can't be thinking about just 2 years old. I got to be thinking about 18 years old. I can't be thinking about just 5 years old. I got to be thinking about 16 years old and where we're going to get there. Now, I don't want a 2-year-old to act like a 16-year-old, right? And I certainly don't want a 16-year-old to act like a 2-year-old, right? But it needs to be age appropriate, and so I always kept that in mind as I was doing this stuff. But again, I had a goal, and my kids need to be godly and love the Lord and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Okay, we're in Ephesians 6. And actually, let's pray before we get into it. God, thanks again for our time with you. Thank you for our kids, Lord. Thank you for just the blessing that you give us when you give us children, and the responsibility. You said that children are a gift from you, and they're given like arrows in a quiver is the example that you gave. And Lord, we know that what you want us to do is shoot them off into a certain direction, and Lord, make sure that they can accomplish the things that you would have them accomplish. So God, I just pray that as we're going through this study, especially for all the moms and dads here who have the younger ones, Lord, as we're going through this study, we just pray that you be speaking to our hearts and showing us things to say and issues that need to be taken care of, and Lord, that you bless the time, and that you do this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we went through Ephesians chapter 5. You get to Ephesians chapter 6, and it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth." And so after Paul talks about the issues of wives and husbands and how they're supposed to be living together, the next thing that he does is he talks to the children, and he talks to them about the fact that they're supposed to be honoring the commandment, which is actually, this is the fifth commandment: honor your father and mother. It's the first one after God deals with the commandments dealing with him. So the commandments dealing with him are, you're not going to have any other gods before me. You're not going to have any idols. You're not going to take my name in vain. You're going to keep my Sabbath day holy. And then he goes right into the family, and he says, honor your father and mother at that point. And the reason that he does that is because after you have your relationship with God, the next important relationship that you're going to have is with your family. And so God's really into the family. In this passage here, when he's talking to the kids, he says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And the reason that he says that is because a child that ended up being like a lot of kids in our culture was put to death during the Old Testament times. So you have a kid who's rebellious and who's getting into sorcery, that's drug use, who's somebody who's a drunk and a glutton, that, you know, those things were given the death penalty if a kid wouldn't repent. And so they didn't, you know, back in ancient cultures, they didn't have the same kind of problems that we have when you're talking about inner city and that kind of stuff. And even in our area, obviously we have huge problems with drugs and that kind of stuff. And, you know, that's one of the reasons that we're doing a U-turn up here, specifically because of that. But this is a big deal to God, okay? And so even if you are in a situation where we've got the stuff that we have going on in our culture, and there's not going to be any consequences that come from the government itself, and in a lot of instances that's the case, you have consequences that come from the lifestyle. My daughter has a friend who she went to high school with. She's now 27. Bethany's 27. Wow. Well, that went by quick. She has a friend who's 26, just died. And she just died because of drug use. And it wasn't an overdose. What she died of was the situations that come from drug use. She literally had organs shutting down because of what she'd done to her body. And so, you know, when the Bible talks about honoring your father and mother and living long on the earth, two things are being spoken about there. The fact that you won't get the death penalty, and if you know any of the stats about guys who are on death row, they had messed up families. And again, it's that kind of situation. They won't get the death penalty, and then secondly, they won't die from the consequences of their lifestyle. And so honoring your father and mother is a big fat deal in Scripture, and it should be a big fat deal today. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking for when I'm raising my kid. I want a kid who honors and respects authority. And the first authority that they need to respect is in the home. They need to respect me. They need to respect my wife, not their mother, my wife. And the reason I'm saying that is because in the time, you guys know my background, but in the time when my family was somewhat stable, there was this one situation where I don't know what I said to my mom, because I don't remember being mouthy to her or anything like that, because there's pretty strict discipline in my home and that kind of thing. But I said something to my mom, and my stepdad turned and looked at me and he goes, "You know what? That's my wife." And I had never thought of her that way before. I'd always thought of her as being my mom. And as soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh, totally different perspective, different world right now. I have just said something that the sergeant in the Marine Corps does not like about his wife," and it kind of helped to straighten me out in those things. And so honoring your father and mother is a big thing. It's a commandment, again, that if you disobeyed it, you got the death penalty in the Old Testament. The reason I keep saying that is because this is a big issue with God. This is not, it's not optional. It's not a situation where you can let it go. You don't get to do that if you're going to raise your kid in a biblical way. And you don't have to be mean about the whole thing. You don't have to, beat your kid about the head and shoulders to get them to do this stuff. But letting it go, having a disrespectful attitude towards your mom or towards their mom or towards you if you're a father is not an option biblically. And so those things need to get taken care of, because if they don't get taken care of in your home, they're going to be taken care of someplace else. And so it's going to end up happening with other kids. They don't respect the boundaries of other children, and so they will beat them up. If it's not other children, it's going to be teachers at school, and that's not there's not a whole lot of discipline going on in public schools anymore, but there's discipline going on in our school, and that's again why my wife is late, and that kind of stuff. And so somebody's going to discipline your kid, and then as they get older, it gets more intense. And so when you're in high school, kids with snotty mouths and bad attitudes and that kind of stuff. Again, this is when I was in high school back in the dinosaur days, but they got taken care of. We had guys that would take care of this kind of stuff. We do it in locker rooms. We do it after practice. We do it, we do it during practice. Stuff like that. We took care of guys with bad attitudes. And whenever I think about this, I understand that I love my kid. We're going to get into this a little bit later. I understand that I'm the one who loves my kid. I'm the one who cares about him. I'm the one who knows him. And so I don't want anybody else disciplining him except for me. I want to be the one doing this. And so if I take care of this early, then most likely it's not going to be happening from somebody else. And after you get past high school and all the stuff that goes on with that, then you're dealing with cops and employers. And I could tell you again, I used to, I'm still an employer, but when I was in construction, I could tell the guys who got disciplined when they were kids, the guys who got spanked. I could tell the guys who got spanked, and I could tell the guys who didn't. And the guys who didn't last long. And not because I just went around firing them, but they couldn't do the job and they didn't want to be around, and they ended up losing their jobs because of that whole thing. And again, what we're doing is we're trying to bring a kid up so that he can have a good life, and respecting authority is a huge issue. I don't know if you did you see the video of the lady just this last week who got pulled over by a cop in California, and she started calling him a murderer and all that kind of stuff? That's a lady who never got spanked. No joke. That lady, I'll bet you for sure that lady never got spanked. She never got beat up in high school either. Bet you for sure she didn't. You didn't say that kind of thing, that kind of things to people. And again, it's where I grew up, but you didn't say that kind of stuff and get away with it. You couldn't have that kind of attitude. Okay, so it goes on, and after it talks about the children, it goes on and talks about the role of the fathers. Never mentions the role of the mothers in the passage. It's the role of the fathers in this passage. And it says, "And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." And I just want to go through and give you some definitions here. First off, training. That word in Greek is paideu. It comes from the word paideu, and it means to train someone in accordance with proper rules of conduct and behavior, to discipline, to train, discipline and training. It also means to punish for the purpose of improved behavior. And so that is what training means in that passage. Then you have admonition, and the word admonition there means to provide instruction as to correct behavior and belief, to instruct, to teach, to instruction and teaching. And so when you're talking about the training and the admonition of the Lord, you're talking about two things: training that includes discipline and training that includes instruction. So your kids need to know what they're supposed to be doing, and if they're not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, there's supposed to be correction that goes along with this. And that's just a natural thing that most people in the real world understand. When you have a little child, they grow up being selfish. They start off selfish, and that's okay for a kid that's a couple of weeks old, or just out of the birth canal. The fact that they're cold and they cry is a good thing. The fact that they're wet and they cry is a good thing. The fact that there's something in their diaper and they don't want it there, and they cry. The fact that they're hungry and they cry, those are good things. But you can't be doing that when you're 7 years old. When they get a little bit older, they start getting aware of the people who are around them and the things that are around them. And obviously, when you get up into the baby stage and the toddler stage, my grandson right now is in the toddler stage. And so there's jealousy because he's got a brand new little sister. There's jealousy that goes on and that kind of stuff. And as they get a little bit older, there's going to be more of this stuff. How many of you who have kids that are past the baby age ever trained your kid to say mine? Anybody? Did you ever train them to do that? Did you ever train them to walk up to another kid, push them on the ground, take their toy, and run off with it? Anybody ever train their kid to do that?
Mr. Pentland said he did. I saw him saying yes.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen. And the reason that kids are like that is because they're little sinners. They start out little sinners. They don't become sinners. They start out little sinners, and they just act like little sinners. And basically what we've got when we have babies are little barbarians. It's all about them. It's all about what they want. And the older that they get, if you don't train them that they have to live in a world that includes other people, you're going to have little barbarians running around. They're going to be little vandals and be taking things from other kids and stuff. Even when you train them, they take things from other kids and pop them in the face when they try to take it back and that kind of stuff. Like my son had problems with biting at one point. Remember that?
He was the biter, in the nursery. Like, your child bit that cow. Oh, of course. Of course, it's mine. So this is horrible, but I finally had to bite him back. That's the only thing that stopped him, because he didn't get it, that he's causing this mark. Here's a little girl with this big giant bite mark, and her mom's looking at me like, I'm sorry, I don't know, he doesn't normally act like that. So I bit him back, and then that was the end of it. So, sorry, I don't know. You don't have to follow what I do. I'm just telling you what I did. I don't know if it's biblical.
There were other things that we tried before. Yeah. In the passage here, it also says, bring them up. And that's ektrepho in Greek. And it means to nourish. It's to nourish up to maturity. And again, there's the idea of to nurture, to bring up, and it's the whole idea of being loving to your kid. And so all those things have to be involved in child rearing. And so there's got to be instruction. There's got to be instruction that includes correction, which is discipline. And there's got to be nurture that's included with all this stuff. It can't just be, they're not in boot camp. And they're little kids too. And so when we're going through and talking about a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, you got to always keep in mind age appropriate type of things, age appropriate. And we'll talk about some biblical standards for discipline. Okay, so here's another point that I want to bring across to you. In the passage here, it says, "You fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath." You fathers, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so the raising of children is an extension of the father's rulership in the home. And so one of the problems that I have seen in families is when the father is absent from the child rearing, in the sense that you're obviously in this culture, dads went out into the fields. If it was agrarian, they went out into the fields. They're working all day from 6 to 6 and that kind of thing. But they're still the ones that are responsible for the child rearing. And so obviously the mom is usually the one who's around the kid the most, but her authority needs to be an extension of the father's. And so if the dads are not involved in the child rearing, there's going to be some problems. And some of the problems is just absentee fathers. Some of the problems have to do with single parent child rearing, in the sense that one parent is always involved in it and the other parent's never involved. Wait till your father gets home is valid. That's a valid statement. You don't want to be using that in every single instance of discipline. The moms need to discipline the kid too, but the fear of father is a good thing for a kid, to understand that when the dad gets home, there's going to be some correction here, and you better straighten your act up and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, you know what? Like in school, if kids are in trouble, especially boys, they call their dads. I don't let them call their moms. They call their daddios, because their dads are not happy to be interrupted at their work because their boy doesn't think that they should behave in class. It's really bad. I've had like junior high boys crying, "Please don't call my dad." I'm like, yeah, sad day.
Yeah.
We're going to call him. So, so the dads have an impact that maybe they don't even know, because moms, we always have a reason why they did it. Okay, look, they went to bed really late last night. I just had a mom tell me that. And I'm like, so did I. But anyways, so sometimes, and I wanted to say this too to the wives, you have to let your husbands be involved, because it's really, you don't want them to. I'm just going to be honest. I don't want it. I think Steve's too harsh, in my personal opinion, right? And he's not, really. But when I'm looking at it, I would not handle it that way. I would not be doing that. I would not be saying that, especially because, little Nathan, he's such a nice guy. He didn't mean it. And whatever it is about, so really and truly, like, God had to teach me, like, you have to just step out and let Steve do it. And they always respond really well to that. And Steve's willing to do it, but lots of times as girls, we don't, either you don't want to tell them when they get home what happened, or you don't want to, you think they're going to be too harsh. You think their spanking is too hard, or whatever it is. And I'm going to use Marcy one time. Marcy told me one time that she just went on a walk while Mitch was disciplining the girls, because, it's like, okay, I got to go now. And, they're not getting beat or anything to death. I mean, they're probably getting spanked or whatever it is. And one time Nathan, he's crying. It was football. He was probably like, I don't know, junior high, elementary, I don't know. And he's crying in the back of the car on the way home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened to him? Who did something to him? That's what I'm thinking in my head, right? And Steve's not saying anything. And we get home, and Steve looks at me and he goes, "Get out of the car." And I go, I was like, no. But I didn't do that. But that's what I wanted to say, like, what? But his look was like, "Get out of the car now." And I was like, no. Okay, so I get out of the car, but I think he's going to be too mean to Nathan, because he's so nice. And so anyway, so I went into the kitchen, and our window looks out, and I'm like watching, like, what is happening in the car? I'm watching, and then whatever happened to the car, I don't know. They get out. Steve makes him run some plays. Nathan's crying the whole time. He's crying. And I'm like, oh, this is horrible. This is so horrible. Well, when Nathan came into the house, his attitude was completely changed. And I was like, what? What just happened right now? Because Steve knows how to deal with boys, because he is one. See, and I just want to do like this. Oh, no, sir, that that mean coach? I can't even believe it. You don't have to play anymore. Anyway, I'm not really that wimpy, but my heart goes that direction. You know what I mean? For my kids, it's like, oh my gosh, they didn't really mean it, or they did something, and then the dad's asking, so how'd it go today? And you're like, oh, it was fine. Even though I just had to beat Johnny 5 times. But you know, like, they need to know it, because they maybe need to go in and say something like, I don't want to come home and have your mom tell me that this happened again. And your kids really respect the dads if you let them do it. But I know tons of moms who don't let them do it. You don't let them do it. So they just sit in there and watch TV while you do it. So,
Yep.
Send them in. Go tell that to your dad. Oh, that was another thing too, is I would always say, they always want to come tell me, oh, Mom, this and this, or ask me this, and I was like, go ask your dad. Go tell your dad. Because they need to be involved in it, you know, and they come tell you. Anyways, okay, we're not even,
Yeah,
we're still on toddlers, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not telling anybody anything yet.
So again, in the passage, it's pointing to the fathers there, and like I said before, the mothers are an outgrowth of the father's responsibility in this passage. But one of the questions that you want to ask yourself is, who's raising your kid? And there are a lot of situations, you know, in our culture, you realize that right now, the United States government is trying to come up with 3-year-old pre-K, 3 to 4-year-old pre-K, and then we go into public school at 5 years old, and then the public school gets them for the next 12 years, and that kind of thing. And so when you start looking at hours spent with your children, it's something that you need to be paying attention to. Who's raising your kid? And so with a lot of people, it can be a situation where they're getting raised at the preschool. You know, the preschool teachers spend more time with them than the mom and dad does, or they're getting raised at school and that kind of stuff. There's influence coming into your kids' lives, and you need to be the influencer. And so you don't want somebody else raising your kid. Now sometimes you're in a situation where you can't help that. So obviously a single mom is working and trying to raise her kids. That's something that you can't help. You can mitigate those situations by trying to get them involved, you know, be watched by family and that kind of thing. But again, you have these situations that come up that you can't get past, but there's a lot of situations that come up that you can get past. And so you want a kid who's awesome, or you want a boat? You want a kid who's successful, or do you want a bigger house? You know what I mean? And so there's trade-offs in these things, and I can guarantee you, when you get to the end of your life, you're not going to be looking back on your big house and your child's failed life and be thanking yourself that you bought the big house. That's not what happens with people. People care about their kids, and they really many times have situations where they're looking back on what they've done with their kids, and they're beating themselves up over the fact that they failed in raising their children because they had other priorities. And so this is something that you got to pay attention to, because your kid is your responsibility. Your kid was given to you by God, and you're going to be answering for the things that go on in your kid's life. You're going to be answering to yourself, obviously, and at some point you're going to be answering to the Lord. And I don't even think that answering to the Lord is the worst part of that. You know, if I had a kid that grew up to be, you know, to just be a complete and total failure, and you know, God forbid, you know, died or something because of their bad attitudes and their bad lifestyle, standing before the Lord is not the thing that I would be worried about at that point. I would just be devastated over the fact that I've lost my child. And so you never want to be in that position. And so, you know, when you're looking at those things, it's really important to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So who's raising your kid? Who spends the most time with them? And like I said, sometimes there's nothing, you know, not a whole lot that you can do about it. And one of the things that I've found with God in those situations is that God compensates. He's always good to take care of that. He compensates in situations where there's nothing that you can do about it. But if you can do something about it, you need to have your priorities straight. And so, you know, I'm in a job where I could, I'm the boss and I could take time off with my kids and that kind of thing. And I'm still responsible. I still come to work and that kind of stuff, but I had a little bit more flexibility. If I'd been in construction, it would have been the same thing. I was a contractor. And so I would have had more flexibility. If I wasn't those things, then I would try to find ways to make up for it. And so I wouldn't be constantly going out fishing without my son or without my daughter. I wouldn't constantly be going out hunting without my kids and that kind of stuff. There's a period of time that you have with your kids, and you need to make the most of it. And again, this is one of those things that we had our kids later in life, and this is one of those things that I saw over and over with families where they're looking at their kids, and they come and talk to me in a counseling session, and they're like, I miss their childhood. I'm sitting here, I got a 13-year-old kid, and I missed all the elementary school years. I missed all of this stuff. I missed his baseball games, t-ball and all that kind of stuff. I missed all the fun stuff because I was busy going out and it's a good thing to want to support your family and that kind of stuff, but not at the cost of raising your children. And so I'd much rather have less and have that time with my kids than have more and not have it. And so I knew that before I got into it because of the heartbreak that I saw in other people's lives. And so it's one of those points that I make. Okay, so having said that, you got anything to say about that? Okay, let's get into babies. Okay, when you're talking about babies, I'm just gonna go over some stuff that I've learned. And a lot of this is just gonna be practical for you. There are things that babies need, right? And so babies need sleep, that's obvious. And they need food, and that's pretty obvious. And they need comfort, right? They need security, and they need to join the family. All those things. And so sleep, food, comfort, and security, and they got to join the family. And so that brings up the whole issue of what you do with a baby. Do you let the baby just do what they want, and then at 2, break them in? You follow me? And so this, it just brings up the whole issue with scheduling. Scheduling is something that we did with our kids. From the time that they were born, we scheduled them. And the issue with this is that your child is going to have a schedule. It's going to be his, or it's going to be yours. And somebody's going to pick, actually you're picking this, because babies don't pick anything. So schedule's going to be his, or it's going to be yours, and when he gets older, it will be yours, and you're going to be breaking him of his schedule, or her, of her schedule. You follow me? Okay, so kids are going to be on a schedule no matter what happens. It's either going to be theirs or it's going to be yours. In the end, it's going to be yours. And you can either do this from the beginning, or you can have a big old upset when you start changing things on them when they get a little bit older. And so you got to figure out what you're going to do with this whole thing. Breaking a kid of bad habits as far as their schedule goes wrecks their comfort and security. And so if you want a home without chaos, if you want a kid that's well-adjusted and that kind of thing, and I'm not saying that you're going to wreck your kid if they don't have a schedule. What I am saying is that there's going to be a period of time where it's very uncomfortable for the kid, and it's very uncomfortable for you if you put off putting them on a schedule. Okay, so when I'm talking about a schedule, this is well, let's do sleep. So for example, in sleep, you have this thing called a circadian rhythm, and this is just science. Circadian rhythm is a biological function of a group of cells in the hypothalamus which produces melatonin with the absence of light. And so the best time for human beings to sleep is at night, right? And that's just the way that it goes. And so biologically, the time when people are supposed to be sleeping is when it's dark outside. And so one of the things that you don't want to do is undercut biology, because your kid decides that they want to be up at night and asleep during the day. At some point, it's going to have to reverse, or your kid's going to have an unhealthy lifestyle. Anybody who's had to work all night long and sleep during the day can tell you how hard this is. And so obviously you don't want to be doing that with your kid. It's not healthy and it's not comfortable. Too many naps can result, when you're talking about babies, too many naps can result in insufficient night's sleep. And so you have to keep a balance. Kids need to, little babies need to have a nap, but you don't want them sleeping all day. And so that requires some input from you to try to keep them awake for a period of time, right? And, I don't know. We never let our 2-month-old sleep 8 hours, for example, even at night. And part of the reason for that is because they need to eat. And so with both our kids, we started off with a schedule, and basically the schedule was about every 2 hours we fed our kid. And when I'm talking about scheduling, you don't want to be a crazy person on this stuff. If your kid's not getting enough food every 2 hours, you feed them when they're hungry. But you kind of put them on a schedule, so it's like every 1.5 hours, we're going to have a bottle, and we're going to feed them and that kind of thing, or every 2 hours. Usually every 2 hours is a pretty good rule of thumb. And so what we did was we fed them every 2 hours. They usually went to bed at like 11 o'clock, and they slept about 5 hours. And then we'd get them up, and whether they were sleeping or not, we'd get them up after about 5 hours, and we'd feed them again to make sure that they're going to thrive and stuff, and then put them down, and they'd sleep the rest of the night. And so it was a very cool thing. By 5 weeks, our kids were sleeping through the night like that, and it was just a matter of adjusting their schedule to what we were doing. And it wasn't a real hard thing. It wasn't hardship on the babies or anything like that. Here's one of the things that moms love to do that can be counterproductive as far as your kid sleeping in a crib, okay? Rocking your kid to sleep, okay? Everybody loves to do that. I love to do that. I liked, rocking my kids, feeding them a bottle, and they go to sleep, and they're so cute and that kind of stuff. But this is what happens to them. You got to think about what's going on with a little kid. So I've taken my kid. He's been in my arms, or better yet, in his mom's arms. Been in his mom's arms, and all warm and all cuddly, and eating a bottle, and everything's good and everything's wonderful. And then you take them when they go to sleep, and you gently put them in their crib, and then you cover them with a blanket, then you shut the light off, and you leave. And then they wake up in a place that they're absolutely unfamiliar with, and they're like, "Where's Mom?" And they get scared, they start crying, and all that kind of stuff. And so we just didn't do that. So what we did was, when we fed our kids, when we did this whole thing, after they always want to go to sleep when they're drinking their bottle. But when we did that, we'd keep them up. So they want to go to sleep. They're obviously done eating and that kind of stuff. We keep them up and play with them for a little bit and that kind of stuff. And then we take them into the crib and we lay them down, and they're familiar with the crib. They know what's happening. And so we lay them down and do that kind of stuff, kind of stand around them for a little bit until they're comfortable with what they're doing. And then we walk out of the room. And when they wake up, they're not usually waking up crying unless something's wrong. When they wake up, what they usually do is they're playing in their playpen, or they're playing in their crib. My daughter does this with her little boy. He's 1 year old. Actually, it was before he was 1. He's probably about 10, 11 months, and he was taking a nap. I have to take a nap every Sunday afternoon because of Sunday morning. I just have to go crash. And so we're watching him, and he's up in my bedroom, and he's in his playpen, and he's taking a nap. And so I go in, and I take my nap, and he wakes me up. And the way he woke me up is he's sitting there talking to himself in his playpen, just having fun. And there's a toy in there. Oh, well, actually, I don't even know I don't think there was a toy in there. He just sit there having fun in the playpen, because he's used to the place and he's having a good time. And when he saw me get up, he goes, he raises his hand for me to come and pick him up. I go over and get him and take him down, and everything's fine. There's no screaming or yelling or anything like that. And it's not that our kids never screamed or yelled, but just in general, that's how it went. And so we put them down awake so that when they woke up, they wouldn't be afraid. A lot of times we always had a baby monitor in there, and we're always listening for the kids. And usually what was happening is we're not hearing crying, we're hearing them playing. And so then we come in and we'd get them and do what needed to happen, change diapers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's good. That's what we did.
Okay. And so, again, what you want to do is have your kid's bed be a familiar place. And that's, again, just for comfort and security. That's how we thought about this stuff. Then, with feeding, and again, your child's going to have a schedule. And so with sleeping, your child's going to have a schedule. With feeding, your child's going to have a schedule. And it's either going to be his or yours. And so you get to pick it. Which one do you want it to be? And again, when he gets older, it's going to be yours, and you're going to break him of his. And that can make things, chaotic. The kid can get finicky and not getting enough, and breaking bad habits is uncomfortable. And so again, what we're talking about is comfort and security. And so, like I said before, babies need to eat about every 2 hours. And if they aren't thriving, they need to eat more often. And so that's how we raised both our kids. They were both fat, little fat kids. And that's how again, we're second generation now. That's how my daughter raises her kids. And I don't know, did you have a talk with her about this stuff?
No, she just did it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I might have had a talk with her. And so our schedule with our babies was they wake up, you feed them. After you feed a child, there is peristalsis. And so what's going to happen is after you feed a child, they are going to poop their diapers or they're going to pee their diapers. And so there's a period of time that you wait after you feed your kid, and you're gonna know that the kid's gonna go to the bathroom in his diaper. And so then we then we would change them, and then there was playing for a period of time, and then there was nap time. And again, when nap time came around, you could tell when nap time's coming around because the kid starts getting fussy and that kind of stuff. And what we would do is, depending on what was happening, we again feed them and keep them awake, put them in the bed for nap time, and then get them up later. And so we didn't generally sleep with our babies. And the reason that I didn't want to do that, and it was specifically me, well, it was probably you too. But one of the reasons that we didn't sleep with our babies is because adult beds are not made for babies. They're made for adults. Right? And so there's been a lot of instances of suffocation of children because obviously you got blankets around you and you got sheets around you and that kind of stuff. If you're going to sleep with a baby, you have to be radically careful. Where if you got a crib, a lot of times you can have a light blanket over them, depending on the temperature in the room and that kind of stuff. And the crib is made to, it doesn't take their body and make them sink into a mattress or something, or a cover for your bed. And so, there are suffocation dangers. And so generally speaking, the kids slept in their bed. Now, after they got older and they could get out of their beds, I was always the guy that let the kids come into bed with us because I liked it. I thought.
I hate it.
Bethany would come crawling into bed with us, and I was like, come on in, sweetie. And, and she'd lay in bed with us, and then sometime during the night, she'd pee her pants. And I'd roll over and pretend like I was asleep.
I think that's a true story.
And again, we had that going on. Again,
They have things called co-sleepers now. Do you know that? He probably doesn't know.
No, I don't
the
know.
newfangled whatevers. I only know because of Bethany. But there's some kind of something that you can stick next to you in bed, and then it's a hard surface, and you can't roll onto them and stuff. So when they're little, sometimes people do that, or you have them right
okay,
next
that's
to your
cool. Yeah.
you have them right next to your bed in some kind of little thing, so you can still see them. And new moms, you can wake up and then feed them and put them right back to bed or whatever. So they do have that nowadays. So
one of the things that we started doing with that we did with our kids, and actually Bobby learned this from her mom, is when they get a little bit older, the babies get a little bit older and they're not getting enough from their bottle, it's like they're hungry quicker. They would put pablum. She would put pablum, like rice cereal or whatever, into the formula or into the mother's milk, and it's just a little bit more sturdy, and it filled their tummies up, and so they were able to sleep longer and be full longer and that kind of
I'm
stuff.
sure that's against some doctors, something or other nowadays. Probably you're not supposed to do that, but worked for our kids.
Yep. And at night, again, for a schedule, in the evening, the last feeding includes bath time. And then, again, we put our kids down anywhere from 10 to 11. From what I remember, it was usually about 11 o'clock. And, some parents do them earlier, but.
When they're infants.
Yeah, when they're infants, they need more time. I'm going to go ahead and put up that next slide.
There's slides
yeah.
up there. Wow.
Yeah. And so there's a slide with, this is from BabyWise, guidelines for the baby's first 3 months. And so those are guidelines for when to feed your kids and all that kind of stuff. And so if you want to take pictures of that, yeah, of course we're in the way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Here, let's.
Our giant heads.
You can get you can either get that from me or you can get the slides when the videos go online. They'll have these things up. Okay, and so there's places you can go to get good information on that stuff. Third thing kids need is security. They need to be comfortable. And so what you want to do with your baby is make them as comfortable as possible. You want to keep fussiness to a minimum. You don't want you don't want their life to be miserable. And so again, when you're talking about scheduling, they're easier on kids. Just like adults, change causes stress, and chaos really causes stress, specifically with kids. And so I keep that in mind. One of the things that's cool about babies is babies are really fun when you are not frazzled, when you're actually getting sleep and that kind of stuff. Babies are awesome. And so again, just the whole idea of schedules. God does schedules, right? And so there is the week. There's 7 days in a week. And how many days are you supposed to rest? Yeah, 1. That's a schedule, right? So God does schedules. And then in the Old Testament, you had the feasts. There were these yearly feasts that took place in certain months. The sacrifices took place certain times in a day. Usually 3 o'clock p.m. was it's not only the time of prayer, but it was the time of sacrifice. And so again, you have that for prayer. You have it for, obviously, for eating, for sleeping, and for working. God does schedules on everything. And so schedules are not of the devil, and they're not designed to hurt a kid. A kid's going to have a schedule no matter what you do. So it's either going to be yours or his. And again, you got to keep things in perspective on this whole thing. If my kid is not thriving on the schedule that I'm giving him, I need to change my schedule. And the reason that I'm saying that is because dealing with Christians, a lot of times they'll hear something from a baby book or from some person that they respect as far as child rearing, and they just make that like law. And with our kids were different, and so generally speaking, everything worked out about the same. But we were constantly watching to make sure that Nathan was thriving, and we didn't raise him necessarily in exactly the same way that we raised Bethany. They're 2 different kids, and so we're paying attention to all that stuff. My goal is not to make the kid do everything I want. My goal is to have the kid have a good life. Scheduling will help that whole thing because of comfort and security, but I want the kid to thrive in the schedule that I'm giving him. And so if I have to adjust, I have to adjust. And I don't know, it's not that big a deal. I've heard of people who came up with, the idea that their schedule was going to be every 3 hours and that kind of thing. And the kid's getting skinny. He's not getting fatter. And it was like the schedule was more important than the weight of the baby or something. That's crazy. You don't do that kind of thing. And so what you're doing is you care about the kid more than you care about your timing necessarily. Then the last thing is joining the family. And again, this has to do with goal-oriented parenting. You are moving your child toward a destination. And so at the very beginning, the baby is everything. And obviously we all know this. And so when we start out with our first child, focus is totally on the first child. And then when you have the second child gets jealous, and the reason that the first child gets jealous of the second child because you're taking and focusing more time on the second child, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. And so both children need to know how to work into a family. By the time you get to your third child, it's like you don't care and you're letting your other children raise them, and that, I'm just joking, but you're moving your kid toward a destination. And so for little kids, these are the destinations. Your kid will be sleeping at night, right? That's what's got to happen with them. Your kid will be eating with the family, right? That's what's going to happen with them. And so by the time they get 2 to 3 years old, it's like you're not feeding them on their own anymore. They're going to be eating with the family. Your kid will not be in charge of the family schedule. The one who's in charge of the family schedule is usually the wife. I'm not even in charge of the family schedule. So the child is not to be in charge of the family schedule. It's the parents. And so that way, a mom can be a wife, and a mom can be a mom to the rest of the kids, and a mom can keep her house in any way that she wants to. And the focus is not always on the child, because the child is joining the family. The family is not conforming to the children. And that's, again, the way that you need to think about these kinds of things. And you can begin their training with these goals in mind, or you can break your child of bad habits later, right? However, that will be uncomfortable for both you and for the child, right? And so, again, that's what I was thinking when I was raising my babies. And then there's discipline with babies too. And, I'm kind of thinking of babies as pre-walking, basically. And so discipline with our kids began right around 6 months, like when your child grows teeth, right? And so if you're a mom and you're nursing your baby and they've grown teeth, right? Things happen and discipline needs to take place.
Automatically, it's an automatic reaction of discipline.
And so, you can take, and obviously you're not going to take and give your 6-month-old a spanking or something, but you can flick them on the thigh, that kind of thing. A flick on the hand when they're reaching for the garbage disposal switch, when you're bathing them, that kind of thing. Not a good thing, and so there's places where kids' hands are not supposed to go. So a flick on the thigh when they're biting, or a flick on the hand when they're reaching for something that they're not supposed to be touching. In our house, in the wintertime, we have a wood stove, right? And it's old school. And so you touch that when it's going, and it's 400 degrees. And so I don't want my child, my toddler, to come up and touch my wood stove. I don't want them falling against it, that kind of stuff. And so there were boundaries. And you can do boundaries by putting up a fence and all that kind of stuff, or you can do boundaries by telling them you don't get to go past this, you don't get to touch this, you don't get to do these things. And the benefit of that without the fence is if the fence ever comes down, where's the kid going to go right at? Right? But on the other hand, if I've trained them not to go near that thing because that's hot, and that kind of stuff, then I don't have to worry about it as much as otherwise. Anything on that?
I'm just thinking of my little grandkid, Lenny. He's 1 year old. And I had some flowers in my office yesterday, and he's looking at me, and I see that he's going to touch the flowers, and I go, Lenny, don't touch those flowers. And he looks right at me, and he's just staring straight at me, and his fingers are like playing with the flowers. I'm like, ooh, wowza, 1 year old. So Nan had to give him a little Bethany doesn't care that I do, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, and he
I
was all
do.
like,
You're so mean to you.
I know, he said I'm a mean grandma. But
No,
you know
I
what,
agree.
he's only one, and he just staring straight at me. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's just touching those things like this, like, oh, you little booger.
Tell him about you.
Well, that's how I was. My dad said my hand would be bright red.
That's how you were?
Well, maybe that's how I am, but it's a good personality to have. He said I'd be reaching, you know how my parents used to smoke, so they had ashtrays, so you couldn't touch the ashtray, but my hand, he said I'd look straight at him and touch the ashtray, and he'd whack my hand. He said my hand would be bright red, and I didn't care. I wasn't crying or nothing. I was still looking at him like this. But so, you know, I kind of like those personalities. It's all right. Directed in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay, so what time are we at? Okay, next we can do toddlers. You guys got any questions on babies?
I just want to tell one thing my sister Janet just told me that her daughter-in-law did. She has some kind of little tent thing, and it was not huge, but they bring it when they go places, and then it's time for the kids' nap, and I think they gave their kids the nap at home in the tent, right? Go in there instead of in your bed. They went to go in this little tent thing and take their nap. And Janet said it was amazing. Like the little boy is 3 and he was kind of whining, and the mom said, "Do you want to go take your nap now?" And he said he was ready to go take, and he just went right in there and took his little nap. At my sister's house, what he doesn't know. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe there's something like that, you could use. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good one.
Okay, so let's do toddlers. And I want to talk about potty training first. Your child will be using the toilet.
That's the plan.
Right? This is the plan.
That's the plan.
Your child will be using the toilet. And so with Bethany, actually both Bethany and Nathan, they were using the toilet at 14 months. And so we potty trained pretty early. And the reason that we even thought to do that was because Bobby's mom potty trained her at 1, because she's got 3 sisters and they're all about a year apart.
And there was cloth diapers back then, and my mom was like, I'm not doing that. So
Yeah.
she trained us early.
Right.
Yeah.
And so put that picture up of Bethany.
We'll prove it. We'll prove it. There she is.
That's her at 16 months. Yeah. And so we had a little thing that we put on the toilet. You'd have to walk her in there because the toilet was way high. We did one, obviously one of the little potty training toilets and that kind of stuff. But by 16 months,
That thing's my favorite thing that she's sitting on, because it would fold up to this little small thing, and I could put it in my diaper bag. So then when you're at a grody public bathroom, you're trying to hold your kid over the potty so they can go to the bathroom, they can sit down. So
Yeah.
anyways.
So she'd bring
But-
that to work too. And,
Yeah, let me just say, I just don't like to change. When they start eating real food, I don't like to change those kind of diapers. That's just me personally. And so I was like, I'm doing it. And it's not like really fast. Like if you wait till they're 2 or 3, it goes maybe faster when you're going to do it because they're older and they know how to do it. So this right here, it takes longer. It probably takes like 3 or 4 days. But I didn't care. Like I had all the meals planned. I had everything in there, and I just stayed in her room with her. Here we are, and we're eating salty things, and we're drinking lots of water. And then, every couple minutes it dings, and you sit them on the potty, and then pretty soon they get it. So to me, it was worth it to do a couple of days, 3, 4, 5 days, because I don't want to change those diapers. So, if you want to, I guess, whatever. But
Yeah.
I don't like it. I think they're,
So what I'm telling
big people
you
poop.
is a lot of times what people say about potty training and that they can't learn to, they can't be potty trained before a certain age, it's nonsense. It's not true. So both our kids were using the toilet by the time they were 14 months.
Marcy, you did your girls early too, right? Yep.
Yeah. How early were yours, Mars? Uh-huh.
So before they're 2. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So a lot of times kids can do things that you don't necessarily think they can, or that people are telling you that they can't, and
And
that
you
kind
can
of
give
stuff. So-
rewards, there can be M&Ms if they pee or poop in the potty. And, I did lots of singing and dancing entertainment while they were waiting for them to pee or whatever. And then I was going to say,
I never did any of that.
Yeah, Steve didn't go in there. The other thing my mom did with us, and she told me, and so I did it with my kids, is I took them to the store and said, we're going to buy big girl panties. Not diapers. We're going to get rid of them. This is what we're going to do this week. This is what we're doing. And so she picked out the ones she wanted with the princesses or whatever she wanted on them, and that's what we got. And so, so they're kind of in on it with you.
Yeah, it's an incentive.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan got Spider-Man panty or underwear, not panties.
Spider-Man underwear.
My son never wore panties.
But now with Nathan, the poo-poo is way hard for the boys. They can't let it go, I guess. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, so at the end of the last time he pooped in his pants, I was like, so done. Because it's in his underwear. He doesn't have a diaper on anymore. And so he had to get a spanking for it. He got a spanking, and then he didn't do it anymore. So I feel like everyone's staring at me like I'm so mean. I spank my little grandkid. I spank everybody's kid. Don't have me in the nursery. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that to your kids.
Which brings up discipline. And so, obviously by the time that they're toddlers, they're getting into stuff, right? And so again, there's ways that you can raise your kids. You can go through, and I'm not saying that we never child-proofed our house. We did all the little plugs in the electrical outlets and stuff like that. But still, if our kid got near an electrical outlet, those little plastic plugs are in there, they go up to them and want to pull them out. And we need to have a talk about that when that kind of stuff's going on, because they have little bitty fingers that if they get shocked from it, it'll burn their fingers off, right? And so we put all that stuff in, and I don't remember if we ever locked the cabinets.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think we did.
Or something.
Yeah, we did. We locked the under sink cabinet where
now they have all those fangled things that you can use.
And that kind of thing. But most of the stuff in our house was not child-proofed in that sense. We didn't have a bunch of stuff that was around that could.
But still, you
hurt
just
them.
say, don't touch that cabinet, even if they're going up there, right? Don't touch it. Yeah.
In case it's ever open. And so when we were raising our kids, we didn't have terrible twos. Didn't happen. And now I think they're talking about terrible threes. My kids were not terrible two-year-olds, except for the biting thing with Nathan.
Well, they were, but they got spanked for it.
Right,
By spanking again.
Right.
It's not like they never acted bad or didn't do something wrong. They did, and then I just took care of it. I don't like that kind of stuff.
Well, when I think of terrible two, I'm thinking of a kid who's just screaming and yelling and that kind of stuff. And
well, they would have got spanked.
yeah, so it was the kind of thing where they did it very few times, is the deal. And so we didn't have terrible twos. We had slightly terrible 1.5.
Slightly terrible.
Right. Yeah.
We did. I don't even remember.
Yeah. And so, again, with the training in chapter 6 here, the training includes correction. And so one of the things that you do is you look at how does God do discipline, right? And he does it different in different situations. And so just in general, you have what God says in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 through 11. That's going up on your screen. I'm going to read it from my Bible. In that passage, it says this: if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? I've got some names of guys. But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we've had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. And you see that word chastening? All the way through, it means a spanking. It means a whipping, old vernacular. It's the word for a whipping. And so when Paul is going through writing about the discipline of God, he talks about the fact that there aren't sons who don't partake of that. And that if a father is doing that, it's because he cares for his son. It's not because he doesn't care for them. And again, it's the whole idea of correcting in the sense of driving your kid into a certain direction. If you look at verse 11 there, it says, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. So it's painful. And then it's correcting is the second thing that you see. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. And so it's painful, it's correcting, and it yields righteousness. And that's what correction is supposed to do. That's what specifically discipline is supposed to do. Now, with the whole spanking thing, obviously we're living in a culture where people are all flipped out about this and say that it's child abuse, and that is just nonsense. Or there are people who will tell you that it's illegal. And I just want to read you the RCWs. This is RCW 9A. .16.100, use of force on children policy, actions presumed unreasonable. It is the policy of this state to protect children from assault and abuse and to encourage parents, teachers, and their authorized agents to use methods of correction and restraint of children that are not dangerous to the children. However, the physical discipline of a child is not unlawful when it is reasonable and moderate and is inflicted by a parent, teacher, or guardian for purposes of restraining or correcting the child. Any use of force on a child by any other person is unlawful unless it is reasonable and moderate and is authorized in advance by the child's parent or guardian for purposes of restraining or correcting the child. The following actions are presumed unreasonable when used to correct or restrain a child: throwing, kicking, burning, or cutting a child.
Oh, yeah.
So don't throw your children, don't kick them, don't cut them, don't burn them, right? Striking a child with a closed fist, not allowed, right? Shaking a child under the age of 3, again, not allowed. Interfering with a child's breathing, not allowed. Threatening a child with a deadly weapon, I'm going to shoot you, or something. You see this knife? Yeah, you don't do that. Or doing any other act that is likely to cause and which does cause bodily harm greater than transient pain or minor temporary marks. The age, size, and condition of the child and the location of the injury shall be considered when determining whether the bodily harm is reasonable or moderate. This list is illustrative of unreasonable actions and is not intended to be exclusive. And the point there being, they're not going to leave it at that. If you come up with something new, like I'm going to waterboard my kid, that kind of thing is not going to be allowed. But again, in our state, when you're disciplining a kid, it's got to be something that does not cause bodily harm greater than transient pain or minor temporary marks, and that's what the law says. And so when I've had situations where somebody's getting hassled by CPS or anything like that, and they've come in and talked to me about it in counseling, I print out the RCWs for them, and I give it to them, and they give it to the representative, and they shut up at that point. And so spanking is not something that is not allowed in Washington State. There have been studies on this whole thing, and when you look at you can always find somebody who's going to have an agenda and that kind of stuff, and I understand those things, but usually the agenda is against disciplining your kid. And so when you go through and you look at the studies, kids who have reasonable discipline at times are way more well-adjusted than kids that don't. And again, discipline's coming from some direction. And so you gotta figure out what you're going to do with them, and whether or not you're going to restrain your kid. Let me just give you a nightmare story. We were in our first church building. It was down at 3rd and Washington, and there was a lady that had a couple of little girls, and neither of them were disciplined. It's like they would do things like counting to 10. And timeouts and that kind of stuff, but their kid just did not do what the mom specifically would tell them. And so one time they're at church, and we had a couple of entrances to the building. One was in the back of the building and it led out onto It was on 3rd and Washington. It led out onto 3rd Street, and obviously during church time, the streets were lined with cars. And so the little girl, the mom and the little girl are going out. The little girl goes out the door and takes off at a run to the street, and her mom's like, "Stop, stop," yelling at her to stop. And does the kid stop? Nope, does not. And fortunately, there's a car coming down, and fortunately she went out from in between the cars, and the driver saw her quickly enough, and so the driver was able to stop in time. And after that event, the mom was just hysterical because she almost lost her kid. And the reason that she almost lost her kid is because the kid did not care what the mom said. And the reason the kid didn't care about what the mom said was because the mom refused to discipline her and to make her do the things that she wants her to. This is another one of those things that I ran into when I was younger, and again, we had kids when I was older. I ran into this with parents and their children all the time. Parents that refused to discipline their kids. There were times when their kids got into real trouble because when the parent said stop, the kid just ignored them and did whatever they wanted to. And it didn't matter what the tone was, because a lot of times what would happen in a situation with the way that they would train their kids is they go stop, 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 count to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, stop, and at some point the parent gets out of control and goes over and grabs the kid, and that's when the kid starts minding at that point. And so you don't want your kids to mind in that way. You want your kids to mind in such a way that if they're in a dangerous situation, you can tell them to stop and they will listen to you. And so I do that with my dogs even. I want my dog, my dogs are stupid. They can run out into the road. I want my dog to be trained so that if I yell at him, sit or stay or something like that, they do exactly what I say, because otherwise they can get themselves in trouble and get hurt. And that's just my dogs. My kid, absolutely. I want them to, there are points where you want your kid to obey, and so you need to, they're going to obey you when this is just like the same thing with the schedule. They're going to do your schedule when you want them to. And they are going to obey you when you want them to. It's just, when do you want them to? And so do you want them to obey you as soon as you say the thing? Or do you want them to obey you after you've counted to 3? Or do you want them to obey you after you've counted to 10? When do you want them to obey you? And so they're going to do it when you want them to. And so you just got to figure out when you want them to. And when I want them to is as soon as I say it. I want my kid to go, to be aware of what I'm saying. And every kid, pushes the limits. I understand that. But I want them to obey me when I say something. And specifically because of dangerous situations. I'll end it with this verse. We'll get more into this next week. But in Proverbs, there's a whole bunch of verses on discipline. This is my favorite one. He who spares his rod hates his son. He who spares a rod hates his son. But he who loves him disciplines him promptly. And King Jimmy, that means the word promptly there is early. And it's the idea of, I don't want to wait a long time to discipline my kid. Then my kid needs to be disciplined as soon as he needs it. Actually, I don't really want to stop right there. I want to say one more thing with the whole discipline issue, because I see people go off the rails with this. God disciplines people, and he disciplines them for what I call the 2 R's. It's wrong attitudes, which I know doesn't start with an R, and rebellion. God disciplines for wrong attitudes and rebellion. And you can see this when they're in the wilderness, when people are griping and murmuring and complaining and having that kind of attitude. God disciplined his people. When the people of Israel were in absolute rebellion against what he said, God disciplined his people. And so sometimes I see parents disciplining their kids for rebellion, but they don't take care of the wrong attitudes. And so you can have a kid who, is doing exactly what you say, but in his heart, he's not, right? Yeah. I'm sitting down on the outside, but on the inside, I'm standing up, jumping up and down on the couch. That's a wrong attitude, right? And so it doesn't take a whole lot to train that out of a kid. I never, ever discipline my kids for kid stuff. Never, ever did I do that. So if my kid knocks over his drink at the table, knocks over his milk, and he's a 3-year-old, and it's because he's a little klutz, I don't discipline my 3-year-old for that. I wipe up the milk and go, honey, let's just, actually, I always, I did this with him. Daddy, can I have some? Yes, you can. And then he did, and I just, that's what I did with them, because they're little klutzes. And if I don't want to clean it up, then I need to be reasonable about the whole thing. But if he takes this, looks at me, and just dumps it out on the table, we got a different issue there altogether, don't we? Right? And so one is kid stuff, and the other is rebellion. And I'm going to see what you're going to do about it. And again, that's when God disciplines. So we'll stop it right there. You got anything else?
No, I think probably for next time.
Okay. All right. Any questions? All right. God does this with you too. Right? Wrong attitudes and rebellion. So there's a times when God tells you to do something, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this over here. And you can expect the heavenly spanking to come. And wrong attitudes, God will do exactly the same thing. Well, yeah, I follow Jesus and I'm going to do this stuff, but I can't stand that guy. He makes me sick. And this guy, my boss, you do that kind of stuff, and God will come after you on those things because he wants you to be godly. And so keep that in mind. Yeah.
What exactly is provoking your child to wrath?
Provoking your child to wrath, from a dad's point of view, it's when you're picking on your kid, when you're expecting things from them that they absolutely can't do, when you're radically demanding, that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that you don't have standards for your kids, but I always try to keep the standards within the realm of what they can and can't do. My kid, that's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about, I don't expect my 2-year-old to act like a 16-year-old. They're 2 and they need to have fun, right? And then when they're 3, they're a little bit older, and they get less boundaries, they get more freedom. They need to have fun. And so 3-year-olds are just going to get into stuff, and they're going to do goofy things and that kind of thing. And so that's what I was talking about. I don't punish for kid stuff. Now, if I've told my kid, I do not want you to do this, but I keep that reasonable because he's a 3-year-old, right? And so if I tell my kid, I don't want you to do this, and he just goes and does it, then we're going to have issues, right? But again, I want my kids to have fun. So I've seen parents that just, and specifically dads, that are just harsh and demanding, and you don't want to be that. And so provoking your children to wrath is the idea of you're taking him. He's got no freedom at all. It's nothing but boundaries, and everything he does is wrong. I'll give you an example. There was a situation, this last month, where I was at a wedding, and my secretary was at the same wedding, and I didn't see all this stuff, but we went to this wedding. And she told me afterwards that she was sitting at the table with a dad and had a little girl with him. And I think the little girl was probably 4 or 5 years old. And so she's sitting there at the wedding. She's being really good. Dad's strict disciplinarian, but he was just harsh about the whole thing. And so they're at a wedding. What is there for a kid to do at a wedding? The only thing that a kid will want to do at a wedding is eat cake, right? And so when the cake came, the dad said, "You've had enough stuff today. You can't have cake. And this is my cake, and I don't want you touching my cake if I get up and leave the table." And my secretary, almost hit him at that point. And she said that she sat there and specifically got cake for her 2 kids who were about the same age. One of them was about the same age. Got cake for her 2 kids, made a big fat deal about giving them the cake. Oh, we're at a wedding, and one of the fun things at a wedding is cake. And what she's doing is training the dad across the table from her. Gives the kids cake, and then the dad kind of got the hint on the whole thing. And he said, well, honey, I guess you could have cake. And he gave her cake and that kind of stuff. But that is provoking your child to wrath. And the little kid just sits there and, it's just a dud, and that kind of thing. You got to love your kids, and you got to let them have fun. At the same time, that they need to have reasonable boundaries around them, and there are things that you don't want them doing, because it can hurt themselves. So, and that gets more intense as you get older. I got a 7-year-old that's playing soccer, and all they're doing is chasing the other people, and they're not going after the ball. And I'm sitting on the sideline about to go nuts because they won't go after the ball, and I'm yelling, "Go ball!"
They're only 7.
making it not very fun.
Jamie Walter is telling Steve, be quiet on the sidelines. Quiet on the sidelines.
She should have had my kid going after the ball. But yeah, again, when you get older, it can get a situation where it's more and more harsh and just more and more demanding, and you don't give the kid a break, and you're not thinking about what life was like when you were a kid and that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Good? Okay, let's pray. Get you out of here. Thanks, Lord, again for your love for us. Thank you, Father, that you are a good Father, and you do it right every single time. Lord, we want to be as much like you as obviously we can be. And we want to be blessings to our kids. We want our family to be a place where everybody is at home, in the sense of they actually live in our homes and they like it in our homes, and they want to be there. And Lord, where they're safe and where they're comfortable and where they're free. And Lord, we want our kids to be godly too. And so God, just help us to see how to do those things. Obviously, we're speaking in huge generalities here. And Lord, you can take all these things and you can apply them specifically to our lives. And so, Lord, we just pray that you'd help us to do that. And just ask that you do this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys.